Sahana vavatu Sahano bhunaktu Sahavidyan karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. Very good. Welcome back. We continue our introduction to Vedanta, and we're proceeding very methodically. In fact, we're following a very traditional methodology that's used in a number of introductory texts. In our prior class, we spent pretty much the whole class establishing the fact that Vedanta is a pramana. Remember that word pramana means a means of knowledge. By the way, I think sometimes it's used in the Hindi to mean authoritative. Doesn't have that sense here at all. We use it in a very specific meaning. It's a technical term. That which gives you knowledge is a pramana. And we went through it. We said that that which gives you knowledge of my presence here in the chair is your power of sight, pratyaksha. We need this terminology, so let's just review it. I think you've got it, but just in case. So the pramanas we're talking about are threefold. As I said, there is a six-fold division, but we're taking it in a somewhat simplified way. Nothing is left out because they're just combined. So a pramana, we said, is of three general kinds. The first one we just talked about, we gave the name pratyaksha. And basically any Sanskrit terminology I put on the board is definitely worth remembering. I mean, I try to limit myself to only the important stuff. So pratyaksha pramana, perception. Whatever you see, hear, taste, touch, or smell. Then next we discussed anumana, which we translated as inference. You see the smoke rising above the mountain, you infer the presence of fire. That knowledge of fire is knowledge, but it's a different kind of knowledge than pratyaksha. What you see, hear, taste, touch, or smell, through pratyaksha pramana gives you direct knowledge. Remember the term we used for that? Worth knowing. Aparoksha. Aparoksha jnana. These are all forms of jnana. Knowledge. Aparoksha means not indirect. Paroksha means indirect. Aparoksha, not indirect, means what? Direct. So your sense organ, sight, hearing, etc., gives you direct knowledge, but anumana can only give you indirect knowledge. That's the limitation of anumana. It's still knowledge. All of science is anumana. It's still knowledge. It's just not direct knowledge. So the knowledge born of anumana is then called paroksha. Then the last category, which is what we're going to be discussing for the rest of this class, is shabda. Shabda literally means word. And it's the use of language, it's the use of scripture, it's the use of text to convey knowledge, to convey information. For example, when you were in college, you heard lots of shabda, lots of shabda pramana. So all of that through your years of school and college is the use of language to convey knowledge. And it works quite well. Of course, in your college classroom, the knowledge you were receiving was knowledge about things. If you took a history class, I think you all had to study Indian history. So you learn about Akbar and all of this stuff, thousands, some years ago. So if you gain knowledge of Akbar so many years ago, is that direct knowledge or indirect knowledge? You never met him, right? So in that case, the kind of shabda pramana that's used in a college classroom does it yield aproksha or paroksha jnanam? Paroksha, right? We're talking about the classroom. But then we talked about the very unusual situation with the 10th man story, where the passerby gave knowledge to the 10 confused boys. But that was unusual, wasn't it? Because the knowledge imparted to those 10 boys was not paroksha. Because they failed to recognize themselves as the one they were searching for. They are not remote from themselves in any way possible. So in that unusual, narrowly defined situation, Shabda Pramana can give aproksha jnanam, but only in these very narrow constraints. So which means when Shabda Pramana gives you knowledge of something that's already immediately present in your experience, then it's giving you aproksha jnanam. And this is what Vedanta is about. So all of this is to understand that Vedanta is a pramana. What kind of pramana is it? It is Shabda Pramana. And what kind of knowledge does it give? At first, it gives a lot of paroksha jnanam. When you learn about this and that, when you learn about the pancha koshas and the 3 shariras and all of this stuff, that's really paroksha jnanam. But ultimately, when Vedanta leads you to understand the truth of you, the nature of your consciousness, the consciousness by which your mind and activities are known right now, when Vedanta yields that knowledge, that is aproksha jnanam. All right, so this is a review of the entire last class. We also talked about the nice anecdote of Pujya Swamiji, recognizing the importance of Vedanta as a pramana. Now, going forward for today's class, we have to talk about some conditions under which pramanas work and might not work. For example, pratyaksha pramana, I'm sitting here, your eyes are open, you're looking at me, but if you forgot to bring your glasses, you might have a hard time seeing me. So there are some conditions, right? Conditions, your eyes have to be in good shape, and etc. You don't have any eye disease, and so forth. Similarly for anumana, if you don't know the relationship between smoke and fire, wherever there's smoke, there's fire. If that relationship is unknown to you, then seeing the smoke over the mountain will not give knowledge of the fire. So I'm just pointing out some basics. There are conditions for a pramana to operate. There are certain conditions, preconditions that must be met. Otherwise, a pramana will be ineffective in producing any kind of knowledge. Now, we come to Shabda Pramana. Let's take your classroom days first. In fact, college is such a great example. Do you remember when you were taking college? I keep making this assumption. Let me ask you a question. In colleges in India, do they have this more or less the same structuring of classes as we do in this country? I suspect not. So in this country, we have 100, freshmen will take 100 level classes and 200, 300, and 400. Then master's degree would be 500 and 600 level. So you may or may not have had that experience in India. But you can imagine, chances are though, before you could take any particular course in college, there were certain prerequisites which you needed to fulfill. So I usually give this metaphor according to the American system, which is before you can take 400 level classes, you have to have already taken the 100 and 200 and 300 classes. So if you're going to take Philosophy 401, there's probably a Philosophy 101, 201, and 301, which are prerequisites for that Philosophy 401. You get the idea, whether or not you had that kind of system. So for whatever class in college, there are certain prerequisites. The prerequisites are those classes without having studied, you're not going to get any benefit out of the class. Some of you remember a joke I made up of somebody attending a class on differential calculus, and they attended every class, they took copious notes, all of this stuff. They got to the end of the semester, wrote the exam, and got 0 points on the exam. And the reason why, of course, is they hadn't studied algebra, they hadn't studied trigonometry, they hadn't studied geometry. Without these, in fact, they were still struggling with long division. So clearly, such a student is not qualified, is not prepared for a class on differential calculus. This is the idea. So, preparation is required. And we already introduced the words, and let's get those words back on the board today. That's our topic. I'm going to erase this. That's the last class. Our next class is all about preparation, the necessary conditions for a pramana to yield valid knowledge. And the preparation is called, we introduced this word before. Adhikaritvam. And adhikari, as I'm pretty sure I pointed out before, does not have the Hindi meaning of someone who's in charge or something. Adhikari here, and used in Vedanta, specifically means one who has the prerequisites. One who has fulfilled the prerequisites is an adhikari. One who has met the necessary conditions for using a particular pramana is an adhikari, in English often translated as qualified student. And that's quite a good translation. So adhikari, qualified student. Adhikaritvam. In Sanskrit, this tvam affix means ness in English. So the state of being an adhikari, preparedness. So, if you remember in college, you might have had Indian system is different than in this country. In this country, they have big college catalogs, which include every course they offer. And for all those courses, they will list in detail what the prerequisite courses are. So you wouldn't be surprised if, for the sake of using Vedanta as a pramana, there should be some very specific prerequisites. There are. And this is what our subject matter is today. And it's crucially important, right? Because right now, we're using the pramana. We are wielding Vedanta as a means of knowledge to lead you step by step to discover what the ancient rishis discovered. But if you lack one or more of the prerequisites we're going to discuss, then attending all these classes will not produce self-knowledge. That's what Adhikaritvam means. And the lack of prep. Remember our student attending the differential calculus class, he got 0 points. You don't get any points here, no certificate. But what you're after is Atmajnanam, self-knowledge. Vedanta is indeed a pramana for gaining that Atmajnanam, but unless you have Adhikaritvam, this pramana, as powerful as it is, will not work for you. You need the Adhikaritvam. And there is a list of 4 requirements, which are always... It's interesting. It's the same requirements wherever you look. In any text, every time this Adhikaritvam topic comes up, the authors always refer to the same list, which means there's no debate on this particular. Some issues are debatable, and some authors will say it's like this, and other authors will say it's like that. But here in Advaita Vedanta, everyone agrees on these four. I'll put them up on the board, and then we'll spend some time talking about them. One is Viveka, and I'll give you elaborate definitions of each of these in just a moment. Two is Vairagya. Three is a group of six. Let's call that Shatka Sampatti. And I'll give you definitions in just a moment. And four is Mumukshutvam. So just as if a college catalog said the prerequisites are Philosophy 101, 201, and 301, this list says the prerequisites for using Vedanta as a pramana is Viveka, Vairagya, the set of six, which we'll talk about in detail, and Mumukshutvam. So let's go through sequentially. Viveka means the ability to discriminate. Now, discriminate doesn't have the negative sense of like a caste discrimination or race discrimination. Discriminate in the sense of to differentiate one thing from another. Discernment might be also a good definition. So Viveka is the ability to discern the difference between two different things. Well, big deal. Well, at the lowest level, it's not a big deal. Every person who is not seriously impaired can tell the difference between one thing and another. But this Viveka maybe this is the defect of the example of the college catalog is Philosophy 101 suggests a very finite course, but Viveka, the word Viveka refers to a whole range of ability to discern or discriminate, starting with the most fundamental. You can tell the difference between an apple and an orange. That would be at the most fundamental level. But to go from the lowest extreme to the highest extreme. What is the highest extreme? The ability to discern reality from name and form. Now, we have to discuss this a little bit. The ability to discern reality from name and form, they'll use the term sadasadbhyam, this discernment between sat and asat. Sat means real, asat means not as real. And here's a favorite example is right here. You may say the table is real. I'll say the table is not real. The table is just nama and rupa, name and form. The truth of the table is wood. But then, wood is also not real. Why? It's a name and form of cellulose fibers. So we have to be ready to discern. You thought the table was real? No. You thought the wood was real? No. Cellulose fibers. But the cellulose fibers are also not real. They're made of cells. The cells are the reality. The fibers are nama, rupa, name and form. But then the cells are made of proteins. So the cells are nama-rupa, the proteins are the reality, but the proteins are made of molecules, the molecules are made of atoms, the atoms are made of particles, those particles are made of quarks. And eventually we'll figure out quarks are made of something else, which are made of something else, which are made of something else. So this viveka, this discernment at the highest level is something quite extraordinary. It refers to the ability to discern the underlying reality because of which everything exists. Why is it that the table exists? Because of wood. Why does the wood exist? Because of the fibers, etc. You go through that whole thing. Why does all of that exist? There must be some underlying reality because of which that infinite series of names and forms exist. We know this because you cannot have a single object cannot exist without a content. No object can exist without some content. You can't have a table made of nothing, right? No object can exist without an underlying content. The term we use in Sanskrit is adhisthana, substratum is the philosophical term. Adhisthana or substratum. Every object must have an adhishthanam, an underlying content. If a given object must have an underlying content, then a whole series of names and forms, this table, which is a form of wood, which is a form of fibers, which is a form, etc., all of this could not exist without some underlying reality, some real substratum, adhishtanam. And most of you know we have a name for that sad adhishtana, that real substratum. We call that Brahman. So, viveka at the highest level is the ability to look in the world and discern that behind all of the names and forms that we perceive, there is a real underlying reality woven in everything that exists, and that underlying reality is Brahman. So viveka, discriminating apples from oranges at the lowest level, does not give you Adhikaritvam. Adhikaritvam requires the maximum viveka, not the minimum. The maximum viveka, and the maximum viveka is the ability to discern the underlying reality, to discern the difference between the cosmos and the underlying reality because of which it exists. The ability to discern Brahman as being the reality because of which everything exists. This is viveka. This is what did we said? You can begin to appreciate some irony here. This is a prerequisite? Do you get it? This is a prerequisite. Oh my gosh. But then, this is Vedanta. This is no ordinary pursuit. This is no ordinary field of study. Now, please don't get worried because you're thinking, oh gosh, how will I ever... If that's a prerequisite, I'm lost. Forget it. After we get through this list, and remind me if I forget, there's a trick which will help us, a saving grace. So we'll come to that before we finish our class tonight, I hope. Yeah. All right. We have plenty of time. So this is viveka. Again, the common translation would be discrimination, and the more refined meaning at the highest level is the ability to discern the difference between the universe and the underlying reality because of which everything exists, the ability to discern Brahman. This is viveka. Then comes vairagya. Vairagya, usually translated as dispassion, and that's a fine translation. Again, just as viveka has this whole range, so vairagya also has a whole range. Viveka starts from telling the difference between apples and oranges and ends up with the ability to discern Brahman. In the same way, vairagya has a lower end and an upper end. What is the lower end? You had enough vairagya to come here this evening when you could have been doing any number of other things. That's vairagya. You could be hanging out at home, watching TV. Watching TV is useless. I don't know, whatever, I don't know. There's a number of other things you could be doing instead of coming for class tonight. You've chosen to come to class tonight because you have a degree of vairagya. So that's on the lower end. And if it weren't for that lower end, obviously, if you can't, back to viveka, if you can't discern the difference between apples and oranges, you're not going to come to this class because you won't be able to understand anything I'm saying. Similarly, if you don't have this minimum amount of vairagya, you also won't be here by our definition. Now, the Adhikaritvam, though, depends not on the minimum amount of vairagya, it depends on the maximum vairagya. So what is this maximum vairagya? In Sanskrit, they'll call it tivra vairagya, intense vairagya. So what is this intense vairagya? Vairagya is always based on seeing the defects of one thing relative to another. So you see the defects of watching television, that's easy to see, and because you see that there's nothing much on TV, therefore you come to class. Which suggests if there was something really compelling on television on Monday nights, some of you might not be sitting here. I know that very well. Fortunately, you're not much on TV. Any night of the week, there's nothing much on TV. Here's the point. Vairagya arises, dispassion arises through seeing the limitations and defects of something. In Sanskrit, we call this dosha darshana. Darshana, seeing the dosha, the defects or limitations of something. So through dosha darshana, you see the limitations of watching TV, so who cares? Through dosha darshana, then you see the defects of one thing after another, after another, after another. Guess where that leads? Tell me, all the efforts you expend in life for the sake of perfect peace and contentment, and that's really what life is about, right? Everyone seeks perfect peace and uninterrupted contentment. All of your efforts in life, one way or the other, are intended to produce for you that perfect peace and uninterrupted contentment. But the fact of the matter is, a lifetime of efforts will never, ever succeed in creating perfect contentment and uninterrupted perfect peace and uninterrupted contentment. You know this. You've been working really hard for many years trying to have the perfect life where you have no problems. Everything is just fine. You have no difficulties, no struggles, nothing. Just perfect peace and contentment. You've struggled for that for how many years now? How are you doing? So, not so good. Just from your giggles, I can tell. Not so good. This is the reality of life. No matter how hard you try, no matter how smart you try, no matter what you do in life, all of your efforts and accomplishments will never, ever cumulatively produce perfect peace and uninterrupted contentment. This is dosha darshanam. Seeing the defects. Here, we see the defects of not individual things. We see the defect of conventional life. Conventional life is a futile pursuit of an unachievable goal. Like our 10 boys running around in the forest. They'll never ever find the one they're looking for. They'll continue to run around and suffer. Conventional life that's what that 10th man story is about. To show the futility of conventional thinking and conventional life. Conventional thinking is you work harder and you get what you want. Yes and no. You work harder, you get a headache. You may or may not get what you want. All right. So that 10th man story shows the utter futility of exerting tremendous effort for the sake of trying to fashion a perfect life, free from any kind of suffering, a perfect life of contentment and peace. It is simply impossible. The recognition of this truth is the kind of vairagya we want. The kind of vairagya necessary for the sake of adhikaritvam, preparedness. The kind of vairagya necessary is to recognize the utter futility. Shall I get specific? The utter futility of going to work. The utter futility of raising a family. The utter futility of going on a holiday. Whatever you want to say. This is, please note though, to recognize the utter futility of things doesn't mean you should avoid anything. It doesn't mean to have an allergy to it. It means to recognize, you still have to fulfill dharma. The fact is, going to work is not going to give you a perfect life, but if you don't go to work, things could get a lot worse. You know this? Excuse me. You know this very well. So this is not meant, none of this is to suggest you should just drop out or something. But it's a matter of discerning. It's a matter of discernment, different from viveka. It's discerning the futility of worldly efforts for the sake of gaining freedom from suffering. We're going to come back to number 3 because this leads us immediately to number 4. When you discern the impossibility of gaining perfect peace and uninterrupted contentment through any number and kind of worldly activities, having recognized that, then you hear something about Advaita Vedanta which says, hey, these teachings can give you perfect peace and uninterrupted contentment. And then you say, hey, I want that. I want to be free from suffering. I want to gain perfect peace and contentment. That is mumukshutvam. So again, there's a range. The low-level mumukshutvam is also the reason you're in class today. You know that Vedanta is something of value and it can give you some freedom from suffering. Mumukshutva, I should define the term for you. Moksha, and we did define this term, I'm pretty sure. Moksha means freedom, as we said. Yeah, first class. We said moksha means freedom, but not merely freedom from rebirth. We put a great deal of stress on freedom from suffering here and now. Everyone wants to be free from suffering. Even an earthworm wants to be free from suffering. Even a one-cell amoeba wants to be free from suffering. There's an experiment they do in some biology classes. You have this amoeba on a slide. There's some water, and you put some acid on one side of the slide, and you put some sugar on the other side of the slide. And the amoeba, is one-celled animal, is smart enough to go away from the acid and towards the sugar. So even a one-celled animal is smart enough to avoid suffering. What does that say about us? If a one-cell animal has that much intelligence, then what are we doing with our lives where there's so much suffering? So this is the low end of mumukshutva. The moksha means freedom from suffering. Mumukshutva, mumukshu is one who wants freedom. Moksha is freedom. Mumukshu, one who wants freedom, desires freedom. Mumukshutva is the state of being one who desires freedom. So mumukshutva, as one of the prerequisites, means the desire for freedom from suffering. At the low end, even an amoeba has a little bit of mumukshutva. On the high end, it means an all-consuming desire. In fact, was it in the last class or the class before, I gave the example that's given by many commentators. They say the mumukshu, the one who wants liberation, this is the image they give again and again, they should go towards Vedanta just like someone whose hair has caught on fire runs towards a pond. With that intensity, being so attuned, what that means is being so aware of the utter futility of putting an end to suffering through ordinary worldly activities, seeing the futility of that and seeing the incredible blessing in the form of Vedanta that can completely solve the problem of suffering. This is mumukshutvam. This is the high end of mumukshutvam, which is a prerequisite to recognize that. I paused. Now I'll explain why I paused. I paused when I was about to say, it's the only way. Now the reason I paused is our Christian friends say what? Jesus is the only way. Our Muslim friends say this path, Islam, is the only way. So many people in different religions and cults will say our way is the only way. And we call this fundamentalism. When Vedanta says that the only way to be free from suffering is through gaining self-knowledge by means of the teachings of Vedanta, when Vedanta makes that declaration, does that put Vedanta into the same category as our Christian fundamentalist friends? Now, and it doesn't, and here's why. When your Christian friends, I suppose by now you've all been through this, right? Some well-meaning Christian friend is concerned for your eternal soul. And because they're such a good friend, they want to see if they can help you avoid eternal damnation, because they have already discovered that through faith in Jesus Christ and Jesus alone, you can gain freedom from eternal damnation. Okay, and anyone who says that, they're sincere. Nothing improper in that. In fact, their religion encourages them to go out and try to help other people like that. So there's nothing insidious or sinister about any of it. Well, let me not go there. That's not our topic. We could talk about this for hours. We won't. I was going to talk about the problem of conversion in India. It's a huge problem. We're not going to go there. Okay. So when the Christian fundamentalist says Jesus is the only way, is that a statement of fact, or is that a doctrine which is a matter of belief? Clearly, it's not there's no way to prove or disprove that teaching. It's something which is taught in the Bible, and it's purely a matter of belief. And further, is there any way of verifying that belief? If you want to find out, is this belief lead to something good, or is this belief useless? Well, while you're alive, you don't get a chance to test it out. You have to die in order to find out, and then it's kind of too late. You die and then find out, whatever happens or whatever doesn't happen. Now, what's unique about the teachings of Vedanta, when Vedanta says that the only way to gain perfect peace, uninterrupted contentment, freedom from suffering, the only way is atmajnanam, the self-knowledge. Is that a matter of belief, something that our scriptures say that we just have to accept as a matter of faith, shraddha, or is it a truth discovered by the ancient rishis, passed down to us through the scriptural tradition, like a roadmap, which invites us to follow in the footsteps of the ancient rishis, to discover what they discovered, and to personally verify the validity of these teachings, right? It's the latter, of course it is. When Vedanta says your true nature is Satchidananda, that's not a matter of faith. It is a truth to be personally discovered and validated. You have to validate that. You have to discover it for yourself. Otherwise, we turn Vedanta into what it's not. Vedanta is not this is our first class. We said Vedanta is not a religion, Vedanta is not a philosophy, etc., etc. And now in last week's class, we know what Vedanta is. Vedanta is a pramana, a means of knowledge. So, when Vedanta says that only only by gaining Atma-jnanam can you be free from suffering. It's not a matter of belief. It's not a dogma. It's not a doctrine. It's a statement of fact, and you are invited to test that statement of fact. Find out for yourself if it's true or not. By the way, just very briefly, just to establish the validity of that, it's not very hard. This is a nice little bit of Vedantic teaching. Let's do it. We haven't done this. This is a very important introductory topic, so let's do this briefly. Consider this. Do you seek some peace, or do you seek perfect peace? Do you seek some contentment, or do you seek uninterrupted contentment? It's interesting. We have our sights set quite high. I haven't told you this. I've told this story many times, but I don't think I've told it in this class. We live in the pharmo capital of the world, pharmacology capital of the world here. So I suppose one day one of these local farm companies is going to come up with a pill. And if you take that pill, you will be perfectly happy and content 99% of the time. Now, suppose I have that pill. I offer it to you. Will you take that pill? Be real. Yeah, of course you will. 99% is a whole lot better than you're doing now. All right, so you take that pill. Then next week you come to class and you're looking really miserable. I said, what happened? And Swamiji, this is the 1%. Terrible. So the point is, we don't want 99% happiness and contentment. We want a state of perfection. Now this is, if you really think about it, it'll shake you up a little bit. We're seeking a state of perfection? Is that even possible? Is it possible for the imperfect to become perfect? We're in trouble. Seriously, we're in trouble. Is it possible for the imperfect to become perfect? No. You know, the example, and when I teach these topics, I keep getting the same examples back again. Sometimes science examples. So if you want perfectly pure water, what will you do? You will, in a chemistry lab, you will distill the water. By distilling the water, you remove 99% of the impurities. Back to 99%. Cool. Okay, now you have 99% pure water, but you want perfectly pure water. So what do? Distill it again. Then, what do you have? 99.99% pure water. Better. But it's still not perfectly pure. What do you do then? Distill it again. 99.9999% pure water. It's still not pure. You go on distilling that water again and again and again. When will it be perfectly pure? Theoretically, never. This example from science is used to support the fact that that which is imperfect can never become perfect through any kind of process or procedure. This is a major topic that's debated extensively in Vedanta. I'm not going to take you through all the arguments. And it's quite elaborate. But I think this is enough. You get the idea quite clearly that the imperfect can never be made perfect through a process of change or transformation or cleansing or distillation, whatever process it may be. So where does that leave us? There's two possibilities. One is we are eternally imperfect, and therefore we might as well wrap up the class and go watch television or something. Because there's no hope, there's no possibility. We are all seeking something which is impossible and illogical if we are imperfect, trying to become perfect, trying to gain some kind of perfection. But there's another possibility. And this is back to the 10th man story. This is back to what Vedanta teaches. And that is, suppose you are already perfect, but that perfection remains unknown, hidden behind a veil of ignorance. 10th man story. Suppose you already, Pujya Swamiji said it so nicely. He said, you already are that which you want to become. His exact words. You already are that which you want to become. And this, as you've probably heard me say before, this is what the Mahavakyas express. Tat tvam asi, you are that. The Mahavakyas, as you've heard me say before, are not in the future tense. It doesn't say you will become that. Tat tvam bhavishyasi. Doesn't say. It says you already are that which you want to become. That's the whole 10th man story. Here's the solution. You already are that which you want to become, but due to the problem of ignorance, what Pujya Swamiji called self-non-recognition, we've used that term before. Due to self-non-recognition, you fail to appreciate that inner divinity, you fail to appreciate the inner fullness, completeness, perfection, you fail to recognize that you already are that which you want to become. You already are perfect. And here's the solution to the problem. You already are that. Vedanta is not going to transform the perfect into the, is not going to transform the imperfect into the perfect. What Vedanta does is remove the ignorance which is covering an already perfect self. This is Vedanta. And this then shows the validity. Now we have to get back to this Adhikaritvam. This shows the validity now of mumukshutvam. So perfect peace, uninterrupted contentment, and total freedom from suffering, moksha, total freedom from suffering is indeed possible. It is not possible through transforming the imperfect into the perfect. It is possible by removing ignorance so that you can discover that your true self is already perfect. Already perfect peace, already uninterrupted contentment, already totally free from suffering. This is to be discovered. This is to establish the validity of this mumukshutvam, this desire for freedom, for moksha. Okay, these are the three. We skipped one, which we're going to spend the rest of the class on. So all of these three have these gradations from the lowest to the highest, and what's required is the highest, and we have to come back to that point before the class is over. Now, Shatka Sampatti, I apologize for the awkward Sanskrit. The term that you'll find is Shama Dhammadi Shatka Sampattihi. That's That's one compound word, and it's not very helpful. A good way of understanding this, however, is a group of 6 qualities which constitute, let's say, maturity. What kind of maturity? Every kind of maturity. Mental maturity, emotional maturity, intellectual maturity, all kinds of maturity. And it's a list of 6 qualities, and we better get familiar with those 6, and that's what we're going to see right now. So this group of 6 collectively form the third of these 4 items for Adhikaritvam. So the first is shama. Shama is quietude, a quiet mind, a mind that doesn't jump around, a mind that's controlled, and clearly there's a range from a little bit of shama to maximum shama. What is required for Adhikaritvam is maximum quietude and control of the mind, is shama. So here, let me just check this. Yeah, all 6 of these are really referring to the nature of the mind. Makes sense. We said these are all conditions for the pramana to work properly. If your eyes are defective, you require corrective lenses. So your eyes have to be in proper working conditions, so to speak. Well, here we're using our mind for the sake of removing ignorance. Our goal is to gain knowledge. Our goal is to remove this ignorance called self-non-recognition. That whole process is going to take place not in our feet, it can take place only in our minds. So let's analyze. These 6 qualities are those which determine the nature of a mind which is prepared. So shama, quietude or control of mind, is the first of the 6. The second is dhamma. Dhamma means self-control, physical control. If shama is control of your mind, dhamma is control of your behavior. Behavior would include not only what you do, it includes your speech as well. So take shama as mental control. Take dhamma as control of your body. Next comes uparati. You won't like this. Most commentators will explain uparati. Uparati literally means withdrawal, withdrawing from worldly activities. Mostly they interpret it as sannyasa. Now, who are those commentators? Sannyasis. So a commentator who is a sannyasi is going to interpret uparati as sannyasa. No surprise about that. The literal meaning is withdrawal. Withdrawing from worldly activities. Right now, as we said, you've withdrawn from other worldly activities. So this is uparati light. Silly. And again, we're going to require the maximum uparati for full adhikaritvam. So, shama, dhamma, uparati, titiksha. Titiksha, tolerance, forbearance, being able to put up with stuff. The idea, mostly these are obvious, so let's just make sure. So if your mind, shama, go back to the 10th man story. And I gave this example, if the boys are so upset, they're crying and sobbing, then the man can try to talk to them. They won't even be able to pay attention. So shama at a very fundamental level means your mind has to be available to listen and understand. So that kind of quietude and control of mind. Dhamma, self-control, what it doesn't mean is the ability to sit quietly in a class, and that's not the meaning. Here the point is, if you fail to control your behavior, you will commit acts of adharma, and committing acts of dharma have two consequences. One is the papa karma that you accumulate. Second is you get in trouble. You make a mess of your life. You end up in a state of conflict. And you can't pursue these teachings of Vedanta if your life is a mess. And you've seen this in so many people. Those who fail to rigorously follow dharma, those who are a little casual and make some mistakes and do things which are adharmic, they end up paying a price. You've seen this. They end up in a state of conflict. They end up in one kind of trouble or difficulty or the other. So for the sake of being free from these kinds of troubles and conflicts in the world, Dhamma is required. Uparati is kind of obvious, as long as you are, I guess to make the obvious observation, if you're shopping at the mall on Monday night, you're not sitting here. If you're sitting in front of TV on Monday night, you're not sitting here. So uparati means sufficient withdrawal from worldly activities so you can be deeply involved in a process of Vedantic study. Titiksha, ability to put up or tolerate discomfort and difficulties. There are so many problems in life that if our minds are drawn to each one of those problems, and we want to fix the problem and remove the problem, our minds will be constantly absorbed with all these difficulties and problems of life. So what we're after in terms of Adhikaritvam is to be less concerned about all the minutiae of life, all the details of life, to be less concerned, to just let it be. So that our minds are not absorbed in all the details of worldly life, so that our minds are undistracted and available for this Vedantic pursuit. This is titiksha, forbearance or tolerance, generally translated. Then, and come back to 5 in a moment. Samadhanam. Samadhanam actually comes from the same root as samadhi. Ability to focus and concentrate your mind, specifically the ability to achieve chitta ekagrata, one-pointedness of mind. Ability to meditate. On the lower end, it's the ability to meditate a little bit, do some mantra japa. On the higher end, which is required as a prerequisite, on the higher end it means the ability to absorb your mind completely in an object of meditation, which is savikalpa samadhi. So that's the higher end of samadhanam. These are all ways in which the mind has to be prepared for these teachings to work. And all of these are pretty obvious. Now there's one we've left out, and it comes in the 5th position. And this one is somehow a little different than the others. Different in a sense of like in a different category. I mean, they're all traits of the mind, but this one stands out. This one is, and we'll spend a few minutes talking about this. Shraddha. Shraddha, often translated as faith. Shraddha. Now, we said just a few minutes ago that when Vedanta says that the only way you will be free from suffering is through gaining this Atma-jnanam, which comes from Vedanta, and we said very strongly then that this is not a matter of faith. It's not something to believe. It's not a doctrine or a dogma. What is this Shraddha then doing up on the board? Why is it in our number 5 in our list of 6 qualities? Why does Shraddha turn up there at all? Well, we need to understand Shraddha in a Vedantic sense. In a common sense, it means faith, not in a Vedantic sense. So we have to set aside that conventional meaning as faith, especially the meaning of andha-vishwasa. You heard me before criticize blind faith. Blind faith is actually an obstacle to enlightenment. Absolutely an obstacle. But here, we're not talking about blind faith, nor are we talking about conventional faith. Neither. Go back to the 10th man story. Suppose this passerby was a very strange fellow who acted very, very strange. He looked and sounded like someone who was severely mentally disadvantaged. Somebody with a major congenital brain problem. And when this man would try to tell, and the man was, suppose a man, in spite of his behavior, he was smart enough to know that all the 10 were there. And then the man is going to try to tell the boys that the one you're looking for is here now. But look at the potential problem. Suppose the boys think this guy is mentally defective. Whatever he says is not going to be meaningful. He is clearly someone who has a mental defect. So why should we listen to him? So, there's a kind of Shraddha. This is our Vedantic meaning of Shraddha. It means to recognize the authoritative nature of the Shastra and Guru. To recognize that the scriptures and the Guru are capable of wielding the pramana, wielding Vedanta as a pramana. It means, it's almost it's almost too obvious. Suppose you're back in your college days, you gave the professor the benefit of the doubt that they knew something about the subject matter, right? So if you take a class on Indian history, you presume that they know something about Indian history. Suppose you walked into the classroom assuming that the professor was clueless. That would be a problem, right? Then whatever the professor said, you would consider to be wrong. And then you would have written a 0 on the final exam. So isn't it natural in a college classroom, you give the professor the benefit of the doubt? And that Pujya Swamiji used to use that expression. You give the teacher the benefit of the doubt. You presume that they are an authority on what they're about to teach. And it's a reasonable assumption. In the same way, we give that same benefit of the doubt to the scriptures and to the Guru. That's our definition of Shraddha. Notice it's not blind faith. It's not even faith in a conventional sense. The Guru doesn't... The teacher doesn't want you to believe him. I'll just make this important point. If you're in a physics classroom, your physics professor doesn't want you to believe in the existence of electrons. Right? The existence of electrons is not something to be believed in. It's not a matter of faith. It's not a dogma. It's a scientific fact that you're supposed to understand. In the same way, the teacher of Vedanta doesn't want you to believe anything at all. It's not a matter of faith. But the listener needs the correct attitude. This is our definition of Shraddha. So Shraddha is giving the benefit of the doubt to the teacher and to the teaching tradition, and looking upon the teaching tradition and teacher as being authoritative and valid. Otherwise, it won't work. Simply put, it won't work at all. How do you know if it works? How can we be sure that the teachings of Vedanta are a valid pramana? How can we be sure? So the answer is, step 1, become an adhikari. Step 2, study with a qualified teacher for 12 years. 12 years is considered the standard period of study. And qualified teacher means a teacher who's enlightened. Then, at the end, having gained Adhikaritvam, having studied with a teacher for 12 years, then at the end of 12 years, if you're not enlightened, there are 2 possible reasons. One is that the teachings of Vedanta are defective. The other is maybe you didn't quite have all these prerequisites. Anyway, as we've established before, these teachings can be validated. I didn't say it was an easy matter to validate these teachings, but it's not a matter of faith. It's something for you to personally discover. Okay, our last topic now. These are the factors or qualities that are absolutely essential for the sake of gaining Atma Jnanam, self-knowledge, using the teachings of Vedanta as a pramana, as a means of knowledge. The absence of any one of these factors in full measure. In other words, if you have viveka but not in full measure, if you have vairagya but not in full measure, it's not enough. It's an impediment. And so self-knowledge will not take place until all of these are gained in full measure. Now, that definitely sets the bar exceedingly high in such a way that it makes it look pretty much impossible. And on the surface, it indeed looks impossible. But here is a major difference between your college experience and the study of Vedanta. Your college experience was very linear or sequential. You took one course, and then you took another course, and then you took another course, and you fulfilled the prerequisites for each course. So very linear. Take this, you have your first freshman year, then the next year, then the next year, then the next year. So you went through your college education in a very linear fashion. Vedanta is not like that. It's not a linear process. It is not, if it were, then what should we do? Step 1, we should only work on Adhikaritvam and not study any Vedanta at all. Why? You're not an Adhikari. So if you're not an Adhikari, why study Vedanta? By the way, there are some, this will shock you, there are some very traditional ashrams that will not allow you to take Vedanta classes until and unless you have finished your study of Sanskrit language and of several other philosophical traditions. They won't let you in the class. So they hold this, it's a little different than our discussion, but we're back to that linear process. You have to get this preparation done completely first, and then you could study. Well, that's not terribly common, but in some very traditional ashrams, I'm thinking in particular the Kailasha ashram in Rishikesh, where Pujya Swamiji had studied for a while. They continue to hold to that tradition. Fortunately, we don't do that here. And further, it's not a linear process at all. It's not that first we gain Adhikaritvam and then we use Vedanta as a pramana. It all goes on in parallel, not sequential, in parallel. That means while we continue to gain Adhikaritvam, while we improve, let me say, our Adhikaritvam, simultaneously we attend Vedanta classes. And it turns out that both are mutually supportive. The more your Adhikaritvam grows, the more the Vedanta will go in. The more the Vedanta goes in, it turns out that it improves your Adhikaritvam. So it's a non-linear, I guess a modern term, it's a fuzzy process. In technology, they use that kind of term. It's a non-linear process. Let's conclude with this wonderful image that'll show you the situation. Suppose you want to start a fire. Like you're out in the woods and you want to start a fire. You gather some wood, light a match. If the wood were perfectly dry, the wood would ignite. We got a language problem. What a mess English is. Anyway, the wood would ignite with the first match if the wood were dry. Dry wood represents Adhikaritvam. Wet wood represents the absence of Adhikaritvam. The match represents the flame of wisdom. So the match is lit and held to the wet wood. What happens? Nothing. So the flame of wisdom is given to an unadhikari, one who lacks the adhikaritum. What happens? Nothing. But, unfortunately, you hold that match underneath the wet wood. The wood absolutely does not ignite, but the heat from that match dries out the wood a little bit. Then you light another match. The wood still doesn't ignite. But the second match also dries out the wood a little bit. Third match, fourth match, 100th match. Finally, match number 1217. When the wood has been sufficiently dried through all of these prior matches, then it only takes that one match. Ignore the 1,000 matches that already came and went. That one match is all it takes to ignite the wood when the wood is sufficiently dried. This is a beautiful metaphor. And this shows the non-linear process of gaining knowledge in Advaita Vedanta, and that is our continued immersion in these teachings. It's like one match after another match after another match. And just as the wood becomes increasingly dried, our Adhikaritvam grows and grows and grows. And just as when the wood is sufficiently dry, it just takes one more match. In the same way, when your Adhikaritvam is sufficient through all of this Vedanta vichara, all of these Vedantic teachings, then it's just a matter of time for that flame of knowledge to ignite, burn away the ignorance of self-non-recognition, and solve the problem completely. So it's, even though the bar is very high for Adhikaritvam, it's not a linear process, thank God. So this image of lighting the wet twigs is really a helpful metaphor. It very accurately describes our process. Om sarve bhavantu sukhinaha, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschid dukkha bhag bhavet, asato ma satgamaya, tamaso ma jyotirgamaya, mrityor ma hamritangamaya. Om shanti shanti shanti.